They gave my 3-year-old a cheap doll missing a leg and said, "That's what happens when your mom disappoints us." My daughter's smile faded. My sister's kids laughed while sitting on their new bikes. But everything changed when I held up their gifts and said, "You won't be getting these." And then, they handed my 3-year-old daughter, Lily, a cheap dollar store doll that was missing one of its legs. And then someone said real casual, that this is what happens when your mom lets us down. And I watched the smile fall right off Lily's face while my sister Karen's kids laughed in the background with their shiny new bikes lined up behind them, but that laughing stopped cold when I showed them the gifts I brought and told them flat out they weren't getting any of it. And in that moment I realized something I'd always known was true. They never liked me, that part was no secret. But I honestly never believed they'd sink low enough to shame a 3-year-old just to hurt me. Christmas morning started off with snow, not the pretty kind you see in movies, but the nasty slushy ice that turns roads into a nightmare. And even so I still helped Lily get dressed in her sparkly red dress with white tights and the little boots she picked out herself, because she'd been excited for weeks talking about Grandma's Christmas tree. And I even let her carry the ornament she made in preschool, the one she was so proud of, even though looking back I should have known better. We pulled up to my parents' house around 9, and Karen's SUV was already parked out front, engine still warm. And before I even opened the door I could hear yelling and laughing inside. The kind of noise that always meant her boys were showing off something new. And sure enough they were out back riding brand new bikes, still with the price tags hanging off, one neon green and the other metallic blue. And one of them shouted about Santa bringing exactly what he asked for while my parents filmed it like it was some kind of commercial. Lily tugged on my coat, confused why she didn't have a bike too. And I told her to be patient, that Santa brings presents inside as well. The living room looked like something straight out of a catalog, tree glowing, music playing, stacks of gifts wrapped in fancy paper. But what stood out was that there wasn't a single present with Lily's name on it. Not one. I'd sent my mom Diane $500 back in early December and told her I'd been slammed with work travel and asked if she could help pick out some things for Lily, stuff she'd like books, a little kitchen set, maybe one of those dolls you can change clothes on, and she told me she knew exactly what to buy, which I guess really meant nothing at all. After Karen's boys finished tearing through what felt like their 5th or 6th gift, Diane finally handed Lily a small box that looked crushed and forgotten, not even under the tree but pulled from a sideboard like it barely mattered, wrapped in paper that looked reused, and Lily opened it slowly to find a plastic doll that was worse than dollar store quality, missing a leg, no box, no accessories, just a broken toy wrapped in disappointment. Lily blinked and looked up at me, and that's when Diane said, loud enough for everyone to hear, that this is what happens when your mom disappoints us, and Karen burst out laughing while her kids joined in without even knowing why, because in that house cruelty always got a reaction, and there stood my daughter holding that doll like she was trying to understand what she'd done wrong. I crouched down next to her and whispered something to her. Neither of us cried, and then we stood up together, and what none of them realized was that I hadn't brought in our gifts yet. My car was parked down the street, and in the trunk were 2 big black bags filled with wrapped presents, all carefully chosen: an expensive designer perfume for Diane, a $900 drone for Karen's oldest, a leather tech backpack for my dad, Robert, and custom monogram jackets for everyone, all things they'd asked for weeks earlier when they sent me their usual lists, and like always I paid without asking for anything back. I carried the bags inside without saying a word, and the room went silent when I set them by the tree, Diane's eyes lighting up first like she'd won a prize, Karen stepping closer and reaching for a tag until I stopped her and told her she wouldn't be getting these, and she laughed at first thinking I was kidding, but when she saw my face she froze. Diane started saying something about not causing a scene. Robert stood up without saying a word, and Karen's husband Mike stared at the floor like he always does, pretending he wasn't part of it. I picked up Lily and walked out. Nobody followed us, nobody apologized, and not a single one of them noticed that I took every gift with me. For 2 full days I didn't respond to anyone, no texts, no calls, just focused on Lily and her routine with cartoons in the morning, pasta for dinner, bath time like clockwork, and she never asked about the doll again, just left it sitting on a chair in her room untouched, which somehow hurt worse than if she'd cried. My phone stayed face down until the 3rd day when Karen finally texted asking if I was done throwing a tantrum. Adding a laughing emoji like that made it better, and I didn't reply, even when she sent another message saying her boys were confused about why their aunt stormed out on Christmas. That evening Diane sent a long message saying I embarrassed her, ruined Christmas, claimed Lily was too young to understand and that I was projecting my issues onto a child, finishing it off with the line she'd used my whole life, "After all we've done for you, and I stared at it for a long time before locking my phone because they truly believed they were the victims. On the fourth day Robert called, I let it ring out, and his voicemail just said everyone was upset and asked why I was being so cold. No apology, no mention of Lily, just confusion about why the money flow had stopped. That night I opened my trunk and saw the gifts still perfectly wrapped and untouched, brought them inside, and lined them up in my living room, each one labeled with a name and representing another time I tried to buy peace. And standing there I finally realized I'd spent more time planning their happiness than my own. I unwrapped every single gift, one by one, then boxed them back up and donated almost all of it to a women's shelter, a youth center, and a family assistance program without taking pictures or telling anyone, just letting it be done. And when New Year's finally arrived, something inside me shifted. I stopped sending my parents their usual grocery money, didn't pay my dad Robert's car insurance anymore, and I cut off the $300 a week I'd been quietly sending my sister Karen for years to help cover her bills. And honestly, I didn't even realize how routine all of that had become until I finally stopped doing it, because that's when everything unraveled. My mom Diane started calling twice a day, my dad sent short clip texts asking if everything was fine, and suddenly Karen wanted to sit down and talk things through, but not one of them mentioned the doll and not a single person brought up my daughter Lily. Then I found out something through someone else, a friend of mine who works near the pharmacy Diane uses texted me asking if things were okay at home, saying she overheard my mom arguing with the cashier about payment and asking if she could take half her prescription now and pay the rest later. And that's when it hit me that Diane had never lived paycheck to paycheck, she just never lived without me either. I sat with that realization longer than I thought I would, waiting for the guilt to show up, but it never did. About a week later Karen showed up at my door without warning, looking worn down and less sure of herself than usual, asking if we could talk, and I didn't invite her inside, we just stood there while Lily watched cartoons behind me. She said our parents were stressed, said they hadn't realized how much I helped, said I was blowing things out of proportion over one moment, and told me family doesn't keep score like that. And I told her family also doesn't humiliate toddlers for sport. She asked if I still had the gifts and I told her no, and I told her exactly where they went, and for once she didn't have a clever response. Before she left she said something that stuck with me, that I was changing, that I was becoming cruel, and I closed the door and locked it, realizing for the first time in my life I wasn't chasing their approval anymore, and they could feel it slipping away. The first real sign things were falling apart came quietly in an email from my dad. No greeting or explanation, just a forwarded notice with a giant red warning stamped across it saying final utility bill, disconnection scheduled. The amount circled in bold at $432.66, something I used to pay without a second thought, just a few taps on my phone to keep their lights on, but not this time. I stared at it for a long while, didn't reply and didn't pay it either. After that the calls picked up, Diane asking how long I planned to keep this up, Karen leaving a voicemail pretending to sound casual saying the kids missed me, money was tight since Christmas, and how she hoped we could all get back to normal soon, meaning the version of normal where I paid and they acted like it didn't matter. That same week Robert called twice in one day and left another voicemail, his voice low like he didn't want Diane to hear, talking about the mortgage being a mess and the bank starting to ask questions, never saying it outright, but I understood because I'd stopped sending the extra $600 a month I'd been covering on their house for 2 years, and he just assumed I always would. Then a friend sent me a photo of my mom standing behind the counter at a gas station convenience store not far from their neighborhood wearing a blue vest and looking smaller, somehow older, and I stared at that picture for a long time, not because I felt bad, because I didn't, not really, but because for years she told me working retail was for women who failed at life, usually while I handed her cash for trips, new bags, and salon appointments, and now she was scanning beer cans and folding lottery tickets because my help was gone. My silence wasn't just about money anymore either. I didn't visit, didn't call, didn't answer messages. I was done. Until Karen showed up again one day without warning, standing on my porch with her arms crossed saying she needed to talk, and I stepped outside and closed the door behind me. She jumped right into it, saying the boys were upset, our parents were stressed, the electricity had been cut off for a full day the week before, and then she asked if I was really going to let them fall apart just to prove a point, and I told her I wasn't proving anything, I was just stepping out of the game. I told her none of them had ever respected me even while relying on me for everything, and that they couldn't humiliate my daughter in front of a Christmas tree and still expect me to pay for the decorations next year. She called me selfish, then asked again about the gifts, and I told her they'd gone to the shelter downtown, the same one I used to volunteer at back when Diane said I was wasting my time, and her face dropped. Then she said something else that stuck, that I was starting to enjoy this, and I didn't answer because she wasn't entirely wrong, not in a cruel way, but in the quiet relief of someone who spent years being treated like a failure while holding everyone else up. And for the first time I was free and I could finally breathe. After that everything sped up. My dad's car was repossessed. My mom's credit card got declined at a local market. Something I heard from another friend who worked there and said Diane walked out red-faced and furious without her groceries. Then Karen sent me an email, for long paragraphs blaming me for the strain on her marriage, saying her husband Mike was burned out trying to replace the money I used to send, saying their youngest had to quit a sport because they couldn't afford the gear, ending it by accusing me of hurting innocent people because I couldn't let go of a grudge, and I didn't respond because I knew exactly who was innocent, and it wasn't the adults who let my daughter stand there holding a broken doll while their kids unwrapped bikes and laughed. They wanted guilt from me, but what I felt instead was clarity, because the longer I stayed silent, the more they exposed themselves, panicking, pleading, not for forgiveness or understanding, but for money. I finally understood the truth of it. I wasn't really their daughter, I was their ATM. And now that ATM was shut down and out of service. Honestly, it could have ended right there if they'd let it, because they could have dealt with the mess quietly, the unpaid bills, the awkward silence, the discomfort of being ignored for once, and maybe they could have learned what it feels like to be dismissed and overlooked. But understanding was never their goal. Revenge was, the small, calculated, manipulative kind they've always been good at. It started with a Facebook post, which alone should have told me something was off, because my mom Diane can barely handle email, yet suddenly she managed to write a long emotional public post for everyone to see, never using names but laying it on thick about the pain of a child turning her back on family after all you've done for her. Talking about how she was now working nights just to afford groceries while her daughter lived comfortably, and was too proud to help. The comments flooded in fast. Old family friends, church ladies, cousins, people I hadn't talked to in years, all parroting the same lines about how she deserved better and how kids these days don't understand sacrifice, and some even tagged me directly, one telling me to remember where I came from as if that was ever something I forgot. What stopped me cold was my sister Karen's comment, saying I'd always taken from our mom and that maybe now I was finally showing my true colors, and that's when it clicked that this wasn't panic anymore, it was planned, a full rewrite of the story. And it didn't stop online either, because they started reaching into my actual life, with a friend texting me saying my mom had called her claiming she was worried about me and that I'd been acting erratic and cutting everyone off, and then a coworker forwarded me a message Karen sent with vague suggestions that I wasn't well and maybe someone should check on me, and that's when I realized they weren't just trying to guilt me back, they were trying to paint me as unstable. What finally pushed me over the edge wasn't what they said about me though, it was what they said about my daughter Lily, because buried deep in that Facebook thread someone asked how the little one was doing, and my mom replied that they'd given her a sweet little doll for Christmas and she didn't even say thank you, adding that she must be learning from her mother, and something inside me snapped. I'd swallowed the first humiliation, but I wasn't going to let them publicly label a 3-year-old as ungrateful and spin themselves as victims while doing it, so I stopped staying quiet. I didn't argue publicly or post anything of my own. Instead, I sent private messages to a handful of the loudest commenters and told them exactly what happened, that I'd given my parents money specifically for Lily's Christmas gift and that money went to Karen's kids instead, that Lily received a broken one-leg doll while the boys unwrapped brand new bikes, and that my mom said out loud in front of her, "This is what happens when your mom's a disappointment to us." I attached one photo, Lily sitting with that doll in her lap, her face confused and hurt, and I didn't need to say another word. By the next morning the post was gone, erased like it never existed, no explanation, no apology, no attempt to fix the damage. 2 days later a package showed up at my door with no return address, just Lily's name written in thick marker, and inside was a beautifully wrapped box in gold foil with a real ribbon, holding an American Girl doll, the exact one Lily had circled in a catalog at the beginning of December, brand new with outfits and accessories, and a small note that said, "We hope you like this one better, love Grandma and Grandpa." No apology, no acknowledgement, just damage control. Lily opened it, smiled, looked at me and said she has both her legs this time, then ran off to show it to her stuffed animals, and I sat there holding the empty box thinking about how far they were willing to go just to protect their version of events, knowing they didn't send that doll because they were sorry, but because they realized they'd lost control. I didn't say thank you, didn't text, didn't even let Lily call, because they wanted to rewrite the story and cast me as selfish and unstable. But I had something they didn't anymore: distance, peace, and a daughter learning that love doesn't come with strings. At first everything stayed quiet, like they assumed I'd cool off and come crawling back the way I always had. But weeks passed and I stayed silent, and that's when the tone finally shifted. The first message that made me stop came from my dad, Robert. Just one line saying he thought he finally understood why I walked out. And I didn't respond, but I saved it. Not long after that, a handwritten card arrived from my mom, someone who hadn't written anything by hand in years unless it was a grocery list, and it said, "Barbara, we made a mess of things. I'm sorry, truly sorry. I know I can't undo what we said and did, but I hope you'll let us try to make it right. We miss Lily. We miss you. We'll do better. I promise. Love, Mom," with no excuses or blame anywhere in it, which almost made me cry, almost. I still didn't respond because I needed to see how far they were willing to go, and it turns out they weren't just apologizing anymore, they were begging. A week later I came home from work to find 2 boxes on my porch, no delivery label, one with my name and one with Lily's, and I didn't need a note to know who sent them, because inside Lily's box was a custom princess bedspread with her favorite characters stitched into soft pink fabric, and her name embroidered along the edge, and underneath that were more gifts waiting to be seen. There were books, puzzles, and a little music box that played "You Are My Sunshine," all brand new, all pricey, all clearly meant to repair something money has never actually been able to fix. And then there was mine, a necklace, not just any necklace but the exact one I'd casually pointed out to my sister Karen almost 2 years earlier, rose gold, simple with a tiny off-center diamond. The one I'd said reminded me of strength because it looked delicate without being weak, and after years of getting soap gift sets and kitchen towels like I was some coworker they barely knew, they suddenly gave me something personal, and even then I didn't respond. The truth was uncomfortable but real. I was watching them unravel and part of me didn't hate it, not because I'm cruel, but because for the first time in my life they were finally feeling the weight of what they'd done to me. I had spent years being the provider, the fixer, the fallback plan, the scapegoat, paying their bills, funding their birthdays, covering emergencies, only to be mocked and dismissed behind my back, and they honestly believed they could humiliate my child and still keep access to my wallet like nothing changed, still expect the next handout to arrive right on time, but I wasn't the same person anymore and they were starting to realize it. A few days after the boxes showed up, Karen texted again, saying her boys were asking why I didn't come to their soccer games anymore, that our parents were trying, that things were different now, ending it with a please, asking if we could meet, just the 2 of us, and I agreed, but not at her place or mine. We met at a coffee shop halfway between us, neutral territory. She was already seated when I arrived, looking older, more worn down, and she smiled with that cautious, hopeful look people wear when they're scared to start talking. And once I sat, she didn't waste time, telling me things I never thought I'd hear out loud, admitting they used me, that she knew our parents took advantage of me, that they never respected what I did because they assumed I'd never stop, and that they crossed a line they didn't know how to come back from. Then she said something that actually surprised me, that our mom Diane cried when she saw the photo of Lily holding the broken doll, and said she'd never felt smaller in her life. I didn't rush to respond, just stirred my coffee and waited, and Karen kept going, saying they talked about paying me back, not just the $500 but everything, that they were considering selling things, her husband's motorcycle, my dad Robert's coin collection, even some of my mom's jewelry, and while I wasn't holding my breath, the fact they were even talking about giving something up for me was new territory. Then she asked what I knew was coming, if I'd be there for Easter, and I looked her straight in the eye and told her if they wanted me there, they could start by wiring Lily the $500 they owed her, not cash, not a check, a direct deposit, with a note addressed to Lily that clearly said "We're sorry," and Karen stared at me for a second before nodding, and I left without saying goodbye, feeling something close to peace for the first time in a long while. They started to grovel, and the part of me that had swallowed every insult for years found a little satisfaction in it, maybe more than I should have. 3 days later the money hit my account, exactly $500, labeled for Lily, no message, no explanation, just quiet repayment, and as small as it was, it landed hard because they'd never paid me back for anything before, not once. Later that night an envelope arrived by hand, and inside was a card written to Lily in my mom's blocky, almost childlike handwriting, saying they were sorry for the doll, that she deserved better, that they would do better, and it wasn't perfect or healing, but I read it to Lily anyway and she just nodded and said okay, 3 years old and already showing more emotional maturity than most of the adults in my family. Easter came the next week and they waited, my phone buzzing all morning with messages, first from my dad, then Karen, then Diane, sending photos of the decorated table, the food, the egg hunt, even a basket on the porch with Lily's name on it, and I didn't reply, I didn't go, and I didn't feel guilty. For once the pressure wasn't on me, they had to prove they were safe to return to, they had to earn trust, and I wasn't in a hurry to give it back. What surprised me was how the silence started to feel after that, Not the relief I expected, but something almost eerie because they weren't asking for anything anymore. No money requests, no favors, no grocery lists, no "can you help us" texts. And I realized I didn't miss them so much as I missed who I hoped they could be, the family I kept imagining every time I bailed them out and called it love. Somewhere along the way I'd become someone I promised myself I'd never be. A person who enjoyed watching them crawl, not out of cruelty but because I'd been quiet for so long that their shame filled a space that had been empty for decades. And for a moment it felt good until it didn't. I caught myself rereading their apologies, replaying voicemails, telling myself I was being cautious when really I was starting to enjoy their discomfort. And that scared me because that was who they had been to me for years, people who fed on power and pain, and now I was doing it back in reverse. I didn't want to become them, so I stopped. No more tests, no more ultimatums, no more waiting for them to mess up just so I could punish them, no more watching them scramble for forgiveness I wasn't ready to give, no more checking a family group chat I never answered anyway. Instead I focused on building something new and smaller. Just me and Lily, planting flowers on the porch, making pancakes every Sunday, starting traditions without strings or shame or broken dolls. And slowly the sharp edge of all that anger began to fade. They still call sometimes, still ask if we'll visit or if they can see her. And I tell them not yet, maybe someday, but for the first time I don't feel like I owe them anything, not my time, not my money, not my child's joy, not even an explanation. And the best part is they don't ask for a few $100s here and there anymore. They don't ask at all because now they know better.